It was a crisp autumn morning when I first laid eyes on Maplewood Court. The leaves were turning shades of amber and gold, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood smoke. The cul-de-sac was picture-perfect, the kind of place you see in home improvement magazines. Children rode their bikes in lazy circles, dogs barked playfully in fenced yards, and neighbors waved from their porches. It was the American dream, or so I thought. I had just moved in after years of renting in the city. My new home was a modest two-story house with a freshly painted white picket fence and a small garden out front. I was ready for a quieter life, one filled with block parties, barbecues, and friendly chats over the fence. Little did I know, my peaceful suburban dream was about to be shattered by one woman, Brenda the Enforcer Thompson. Brenda was the self-appointed queen of Maplewood Court. She was the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a position she held with an iron fist. Her reign was marked by an endless stream of rules, regulations, and fines. No one dared to cross her, and those who did quickly learned the error of their ways. Brenda was the type of person who could turn a simple disagreement into a full-blown legal battle, and she loved every minute of it. I first met Brenda on my second day in the neighborhood. I was unpacking boxes in my garage when I heard a sharp knock on the door. Standing there was a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a pastel pink tracksuit and matching VY sore. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, and her lips were painted a shade of red that could only be described as aggressive. "Welcome to Maplewood Court," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I'm Brenda Thompson, the HOA president. I just wanted to drop off the neighborhood rulebook." She handed me a thick binder filled with pages of regulations, each one more absurd than the last. No grass taller than 2 inches, no holiday decorations before Thanksgiving, and absolutely no parking on the street overnight. "Let's keep things orderly around here," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We like to maintain a certain standard." I nodded politely, not wanting to make waves on my first day. But as I flipped through the rulebook, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a dictatorship, and Brenda was its dictator. 2 weeks later, the unthinkable happened. I was in my kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee and enjoying the quiet morning, when I heard a loud crash. The entire house shook, and for a moment, I thought we were having an earthquake. I ran outside to find Brenda's golf cart embedded in my garage door. The scene was surreal. Brenda was sitting in the driver's seat, completely unfazed, sipping from a monogrammed tumbler. Her golf cart, a garish gold-plated monstrosity with underglow lights and a vanity plate that read Queen Bee, was smoking slightly, as if it had just served ved a demolition derby. "Are you okay?" I asked, my heart still racing. Brenda adjusted her oversized sunglasses and glared at me. "This is entirely your fault," she snapped. "Your driveway is an illegal angle. It's not HOA approved." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. I didn't even know there was a rule about driveway angles. "Well, there is," she said, stepping out of the wreckage like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. "And your house is an obstruction. My golf cart had the right of way." I looked at the mangled mess of her golf cart, then back at her. "You drove into my house." Brenda ignored me and pulled out her phone, snapping photos of the damage. She then called someone, and I assumed it was a tow truck. But no, it was her cousin, the HOA treasurer, who arrived with a clipboard and a smug expression. "Tisk, tisk," he said, surveying the scene. "I warned you about non-compliant curb gradients." I didn't even know what a curb gradient was, but it didn't matter. Brenda was already launching into a monologue about how her physical and emotional trauma would require therapy, chiropractic realignment, and possibly even a lawsuit. She claimed she would be filing a claim for garage-related whiplash. Meanwhile, I noticed something odd about her golf cart. There was a suspicious red button on the dashboard labeled Boost. "Did you install nitrous oxide on a golf cart?" I asked, incredulous. "That's irrelevant," Brenda snapped. "You hit my house with a rocket-powered golf cart." "I didn't hit your house," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You drove into my garage." Brenda ignored me and continued to take photos, muttering about hostile architecture and emotional distress. It was clear that this wasn't just about the crash. Brenda saw me as a threat to her kingdom, and she was determined to make my life a leave-vying hell. The next day, a thick envelope appeared on my doorstep. Inside were legal papers. Brenda was suing me for damages, including emotional distress, vehicle trauma, and loss of social standing in the neighborhood. She claimed that the public nature of the crash had humiliated her before her peers and left her unable to sleep. I brought the documents to a lawyer friend who laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. "She's suing you because she crashed into your house?" he asked between wheezes. "That's like suing a tree for getting in the way of your axe." But then his laughter faded. "Technically, if she can get the HOA on her side, she could cause you a lot of pain. Fines, zoning issues, you name it. She could make your life miserable until you leave." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the crash. This was war. Brenda wasn't trying to win money. She was trying to destroy my peace, my bank account, and my will to stay. She saw me as a threat to her cul-de-sac kingdom, and this was her preemptive strike. I considered just fixing the garage, paying the fines, and selling the house to some rich tech bro who wouldn't care. But something about the smug way Brenda sipped her drink and posed for photos in front of the wreckage sparked a fire in me. She thought I'd roll over. She thought I'd be another one of the neighborhood sheep who bowed to her little regime. What she didn't know is that I grew up with 3 older brothers, all of whom believed in the ancient art of creative retaliation. I had learned how to play the long game, and now I was about to turn this suburban nightmare into a reality show Brenda would never forget. The first step was to gather evidence. I needed proof that Brenda's golf cart was modified beyond HOA regulations. I started by talking to my neighbors, most of whom were too afraid of Brenda to speak openly. But then I met Max, a 9-year-old boy who ran a lemonade stand at the corner of the street. Max was a sharp kid with a business sense that would put most adults to shame. I stopped by his stand one afternoon and asked if he had seen anything unusual on the day of the crash. Max grinned and leaned in. "I saw her hit the red button just before she launched herself into your house," he said. "You mean the NOS button?" I asked. "Yep," Max replied. "Sounded like a rocket. My dog still won't go near the driveway." That one comment got the gears turning. If Brenda had used a nitrous boost on her golf cart, then the crash wasn't an accident, it was a mini explosion. I asked Max if he had seen Brenda make any modifications to the cart, and he nodded enthusiastically. "She let me sit in it once," he said. "Told me it was illegal in 3 states. I stared at him. "And you just casually sharing this with me now?" Max shrugged. "Premium intel costs extra." I handed him a Do Law 5 bill and a high five. "You didn't get it from me," he said with a salute. That evening, I did some digging online. It didn't take long to find photos Brenda had posted on a golf cart enthusiast forum. One featured her standing proudly beside the cart with the caption, "Turbo Queen of the HOA." Another showed her dashboard with a NOS button and a custom acceleration chip. I screen capped everything and pulled up the HOA's bylaws. Buried deep in section 14.3, right below pet leash requirements and bird feeder restrictions, was a line that changed everything. All personal vehicles, including carts, must comply with neighborhood safety standards and may not be modified in a way that increases velocity beyond base manufacturer specifications. Brenda had violated her own precious rules. The night before the HOA hearing felt like the calm before a suburban storm. I wasn't sure if I was preparing for a bake sale or a courtroom brawl, but I laid out every piece of evidence like I was about to go on Judge Judy. Photos of Brenda's golf cart mods, screenshots of her forum posts, the HOA bylaw violations, and the audio recording from Max. It was all printed, labeled, and placed in a binder so organized it could have made Martha Stewart weep. My lawyer friend, Mark, prepped me with mock questions in my leave-vying room while nervously chewing on a chocolate chip granola bar, like it was his emotional support snack. I didn't sleep much that night, part nerves, part adrenaline, part sheer disbelief that I was about to legally square off with a woman who once fined a neighbor for VYing the wrong kind of holiday lights. The HOA meeting was held at the neighborhood clubhouse, a place usually reserved for toddler birthday parties and painfully awkward potlucks. That night, it was transformed into the scene of a suburban showdown. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. Pictures of lukewarm water sat on the refreshment table, and a projector was set up to display VY Sul EVY Denke. It was more courtroom than community center. People filed in slowly, whispers buzzing through the room like mosquitoes. Everyone knew something big was coming. Brenda arrived fashionably late, of course, wearing a pink pantsuit that somehow screamed both First Lady and WVY Lane. She walked in with her cousin, the HOA treasurer, trailing behind her like a nervous intern clutching a clipboard and avoiding eye contact. Brenda took her seat in the front row, crossed her legs dramatically, and gave me a tight-lipped smile that barely disguised her contempt. I nodded politely. Let the games begin. The board president, a woman named Marcy who I hadn't seen speak more than 3 words in any pre-VYS meeting, called things to order. She began by outlining the purpose of the gathering, to address recent neighborhood complaints, HOA policy violations, and a pending legal dispute involved VY-ing 2 residents. Then she gestured toward me and said, "You may present your case." I stood up, took a deep breath, and began. I walked the room through the incident from the beginning, the crash, the aftermath, the lawsuit. Then I moved on to the golf cart, her modifications, the NOS button, the speed enhancement posts she proudly shared online. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room as the images hit the projector screen. Brenda stiffened, her smile gone. Then I pulled out the HOA bylaw, Section 14, Paragraph 3. I read it aloud slowly. The same rule Brenda had used against others for years, the one she had broken herself. Personal vehicles may not be modified in a way that increases velocity beyond base manufacturer specifications. Clear as day. Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her cousin scribbled something on his clipboard like it might save him from sinking. It wouldn't. Then came a final blow. I played the audio recording for Max. Brenda's voice filled the room, casual and smug as she discussed teaching me a lesson, faking the crash just enough, and making sure her cousin handled the board. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum. Even the water in the plastic pitcher seemed to stop rippling. Marcy looked at Brenda. "Do you deny this is your voice?" Brenda stammered. "That's clearly been edited." Max, sitting quietly in the back with his lemonade stand hoodie zipped to his chin, raised his hand and said, "I recorded it on my mom's old iPad. I can show you the original file." Marcy nodded once. "Thank you, Max." Brenda stood suddenly. "This is a witch hunt. You people should be ashamed of yourselves. I've given years to this neighborhood. I organized fundraisers, hosted garage sales. One of the older board members, Mr. Feldman, finally spoke up. And you find my wife because her garden gnome was facing the wrong way. You've ruled this place like a miniature dictator." Laughter rippled through the room. A few people even clapped. Brenda, red-faced and sputtering, turned to her cousin. "Say something. You're the HOA treasurer." He cleared his throat and said very quietly, "I think it's best if I step down." Brenda looked like someone had just canceled Christmas. She turned back to the board, but the decision had already been made. Marcy announced that Brenda would be temporarily suspended from all HOA-related duties pending further investigation. Her lawsuit against me would be dropped, and she would be responsible for covering the cost of the garage damage plus fines for her own violations. And just when it couldn't get better, it did. The local tow truck operator, who had been called earlier by the HOA at Mark's suggestion, showed up outside the clubhouse. He walked in with a clipboard, spotted Brenda, and said, "Ma'am, I'm here to collect the modified golf cart." The HOA deemed it a safety hazard. The room erupted. Some people laughed. Others just stared in awe. Brenda looked like she might faint. Her prize cart, the golden chariot of her suburban empire, was being impounded. She stormed out of the meeting, throwing a parting shot over her shoulder. "You'll regret this. All of you." Nobody followed her. The next week was blissfully quiet. The citations on my mailbox stopped. People smiled at me when I walked by. Max gave me a free lemonade. Even Brenda's cousin waved from across the street, possibly relieved that he no longer had to be her lackey. I patched up my garage, repainted it a nice HOA-approved gray, and added a new security camera just in case. But my favorite addition was a wooden sign I hung just above the garage door. Simple, tasteful, and carved with laser precision. No Brenda zone. The neighborhood loved it. I even got a handwritten note from Marcy that said, "Well played." As for Brenda, she was rarely seen after that. Rumor has it she tried to run for HOA president again and lost in a landslide to an 80-year-old retired school librarian named Phyllis, who campaigned on peace, quiet, and fewer forms. Her golf cart, once the terror of the cul-de-sac, now sat gathering dust behind her garage island, unpowered and legally neutered. In the end, Brenda had tried to crash her way into control, but she didn't count on someone who read the rules better than she did. She brought chaos. I brought receipts. She fired a lawsuit. I fired back with truth, tape, and a neighborhood that had finally had enough. She wanted revenge. I gave her reality. And let me tell you, nothing in this world feels better than watching a suburban tyrant get towed. With Brenda temporarily dethroned, Maplewood Court experienced a newfound sense of freedom. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak up began to share their grievances. It turned out that Brenda's reign of terror had left a trail of resentment, and her suspension was the spark that ignited a quiet rebellion. One evening, a small group of neighbors gathered in my backyard. There was Mr. Feldman, the retired engineer who had been fined for his garden gnome; Lisa, a single mom who had been harassed for leaving her trash cans out too long; and Max's parents, who had been threatened with fines for their son's lemonade stand. Even Dennis, Brenda's cousin and former HOA treasurer, showed up, looking sheepish but determined to make amends. "We can't let Brenda come back, Mr. Feldman said, his voice steady but firm. "She's been ruling this neighborhood like it's her personal fiefdom. It's time we take back control." Lisa nodded. "But how? She's still on the board, and she's got connections. If we're not careful, she'll find a way to worm her way back in." I leaned forward, my binder of Denke still fresh in my mind. "We need to make sure the HOA board is transparent and accountable. No more secret meetings, no more arbitrary fines. We need to rewrite the bylaws to make sure this never happens again." Dennis cleared his throat. "I can help with that. I know how the system works, and I got access to the records. If we can get enough support, we can call for a special meeting and vote on new leadership." The group murmured in agreement. It was a risky plan, but it was our best shot at ensuring Brenda's reign was over for good. The special meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In that time, the neighborhood buzzed with active VY. Flyers were distributed, petitions were signed, and alliances were formed. Even Max got involved, using his lemonade stand as a campaign hub to rally support for the cause. Brenda, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent. Rumor had it she was laying low, biding her time until she could strike back. But we weren't going to give her the chance. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Every chair was filled, and people stood along the walls, eager to witness what many were calling the Maplewood Revolution. Brenda arrived late, as usual, but this time she wasn't alone. She had brought a lawyer, a slick-looking man in a tailored suit who carried himself with the confidence of someone who had won more battles than he had lost. Marcy, the board president, called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to discuss the future of our neighborhood," she began. "There have been concerns raised about the current leadership and the direction of the HOA. We'll hear from both sides and then take a vote." Brenda's lawyer was the first to speak. He painted a picture of Brenda as a dedicated leader who had made tough decisions for the good of the community. He dismissed the accusations against her as baseless and argued that her suspension was an overreaction. Then it was our turn. I stood up, my binder in hand, and walked the room through the Denke once more. But this time, I wasn't alone. Mr. Feldman spoke about the arbitrary fines he had received. Lisa shared how Brenda had made her feel unwelcome in the neighborhood. Even Dennis, to everyone's surprise, admitted that he had been complicit in Brenda's abuses of power. "This isn't just about one person," I said, addressing the room. "This is about the kind of community we want to live in. Do we want a neighborhood ruled by fear and intimidation, or do we want a place where everyone feels welcome and respected?" The room erupted in applause. Even some of Brenda's staunchest supporters seemed to waver. The vote was conducted by secret ballot. As the ballots were collected and counted, the tension in the room was palpable. Brenda sat stiffly in her seat, her lawyer whispering in her ear. I could see the cracks in her facade, the fear that her empire was crumbling. Finally, Marcy stood up to announce the results. By majority vote, the motion to remove Brenda Thompson from the HOA board and appoint new leadership has passed. The room exploded in cheers. Brenda stood up, her face a mask of fury. "This isn't over," she hissed, glaring at me. "You'll regret this." But no one was listening. The neighborhood had spoken, and, for the first time in years, Maplewood Court felt like a community again. In the weeks that followed, the changes were immediate. The new HOA board, led by Mr. Feldman and Lisa, worked to rewrite the bylaws, making them fairer and more transparent. Fines were reduced, and the focus shifted from enforcing arbitrary rules to fostering a sense of community. Brenda, true to her word, didn't go quietly. She filed a lawsuit against the HOA, claiming wrongful termination, but it was quickly dismissed. Without her position of power, she had little influence, and her attempts to rally support fell flat. As for me, I became something of a local hero. My garage, now fully repaired, bore the No Brenda Zone sign as a badge of honor. Max's lemonade stand became a neighborhood landmark, and even Dennis found redemption by helping to organize a community cleanup day. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized how far we had come. Maplewood Court was no longer a dictatorship. It was a community, a place where people looked out for each other and worked together to make it better. Brenda, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale. Her golf cart, once the symbol of her power, sat rusting in her driveway, a relic of a bygone era. She rarely left her house, and when she did, it was with a sense of defeat that even her designer tracksuits couldn't disguise. In the end, Brenda had tried to rule with fear and intimidation, but she underestimated the power of a united community. She wanted control, but what she got was a lesson in humility. And as for me, I learned that sometimes the quietest neighborhoods hide the loudest battles. But with a little courage, a lot of EVY denke, and the support of your neighbors, even the most entrenched tyrant can be toppled. Years later, Maplewood Court is still thrive-VYing. The No Brenda Zone sign has become a symbol of the neighborhood's resilience, a reminder of the time we stood up to a bully and won. Brenda eventually moved away. Her house sold to a young family who quickly became part of the community. As for me, I'm still here, enjoying the peace and quiet I fought so hard to protect. Every now and then, I'll see Max, now a teenager, riding his bike down the street, and I'll smile, knowing that the future of Maplewood Court is in good hands. Because in the end, it wasn't just about defeating Brenda. It was about building a neighborhood where everyone could feel at home. And that's a VY Tory worth fighting for. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this VY Deo with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next VY Deo.